This broadcast has been brought to you by friends and partners of Alfano Ministries International. Thank you for partnering with us today. All right, here we are. We're back with the 7K Revelation podcast. I'm your host, Marc Alfano, and this is an exciting episode for me because, every once in a while you meet somebody in your life and then you experience some of their materials and things like that, and it makes an impact on you. And this next guest has done that just for me and my wife. And it's I'll let him get into his story here in a minute. But before I do, I want to just quickly show you guys why we do what we do. Okay, so we are called the 7K Revelation Podcast, and a lot of times people ask, what does that even mean? And that actually comes from Romans. It's 11:3 and 5. And it's where Elijah's crying out to God, and he's like, Lord, have they killed your prophets and torn down your altars? Am I the only one left? And now they're trying to kill me too. And you remember what God said? He said, no, there's 7,000 others that haven't bowed the knee to Baal. And so this is really revealing the people out there who are, in normal life. We interview people in ministry, but also kingdom business and just, life in general, who are out there making big moves and doing things for the Lord. And also just, being the light of Christ in their workplace. And then the next thing is that in Revelation, and this is a big one, it's 11 verse, 11 or 12:11, I'm sorry. And it says, and they have defeated him by the blood of the Lamb and by their testimony. And if you think about it, we all know the power of the blood of the Lamb. But whenever you couple that with somebody's testimony, it's like the 1-2 punch, right? That defeats the enemy. And then the last thing that I love is, this is from Genesis, and it's 11:5 and 6 from the NLT. It says, this is to put it into context. They were building the Tower of Babel, and God came down from heaven, and the Lord came down, and he said, look at the city and the tower and the people. And he said, man, the people united, they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. And so what we've seen is division in the church. There's a million ways to be a Christian. There's one way to be a Muslim, I always say, and that's why they're so, united, and our church is so divided. So with our podcast, it's like we want to hear from people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds. Where did you come from? Where are you going? And the other thing too is that, it's not so much about the denomination as it is about the message. And the message is that Jesus Christ died so that we can have eternal life. So my next guest is none other than Dr. Paul Williams. And I'm going to go ahead and bring Dr. Paul up here to the stage. And I'm just, how did I meet Dr. Paul was literally through my church. Our pastor, Pastor Rodney Howard-Brown, and Dr. Paul Williams wrote a couple of books. The first one was, I believe, was the Killing of Uncle Sam, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And then you guys did The Killing of the Planet, which I actually have here behind me. It's a great book. I actually just finished it again for like the third time. Amazing books. But that's not just who you are. You have a deep story. And I remember the first time I met you, I said, oh, my name is Marc Alfano. And you were like, oh, I knew some Alfanos from Scranton and stuff like that. And then you talked about your history with organized crime and stuff like that. I was so fascinated by it. So let's just jump into it. Let's just hear about Dr. Paul, where you started, a little bit about your life, and then we'll just jump right in.
Well, let me begin. Serpentine, the first Catholic, and I was raised in a family of coal miners. And, we didn't have money. And I was a pretty good student, and I ended up getting several scholarships, and I received my PhD in academia, in Latin, and medieval philosophy. And from that point on, I'm going back way back, Mark, before you were even thought of as a conception. 1976, I ended up working for William F. Buckley at National Review, and that's where I began my writing career. He was a phenomenal person and a tremendous intellectual. And if any of your listeners don't know him, I would encourage them to look him up. He was incredibly significant and in his day, incredibly powerful. But at that time, I was very much yoked to the Roman Catholic Church. I was a senior editor of the Fellowship of Catholic Scholars. I was teaching at Catholic schools, University of Scranton, several other universities that were related to the Jesuits. And I was really basically a Catholic who was disillusioned by Vatican II. Before Vatican II, of course, the liturgy of the Mass was an inspiration for composers, for incredible music, incredible art. And it was really all destroyed in 1965 with the decree on ecumenism. The Latin was done away with. The idea of making a sacrifice at the altar was done away with. The idea of the priest being ontologically different from other people was done away with by Vatican II. Before Vatican II, for instance, a priest could only touch the Eucharist with his thumb and index finger, which were especially anointed for that purpose. So any Catholic, when you were receiving communion, any Catholic could not touch that communion. Even think about that. Or any person who was not an ordained priest could not touch that. It was so, the whole Mass revolved around a thing untouchable, so ineffably holy that nobody could touch it. Or that's why they had patents. When you received communion in the Catholic Church, they put a communion catcher under your chin. It was called a patent. And that would prevent the catastrophe of the host falling to the floor. Because in every element, the smallest morsel of that host was the whole body and blood of Jesus Christ. Once again, that whole Roman rite centered on, and our teaching, transubstantiation, the idea of the consecration of the Mass, all centered on this idea of a thing that was untouched. Well, after Vatican II, that completely changed. After Vatican II, anyone could touch the host. They patents, the communion catchers were done away with. And it received the point where women were distributing the communion in Catholic churches. Deacons were dipping into the chop. That would have never occurred before. And by the way, it's still occurring, of course, throughout the world, and it's all antithetical in the law. So I had a problem with the church. That's the first thing you have to understand. And yet I was linked to the church by my profession, by my teaching profession, by my writing profession, and of course by my personal life. So let's cut to 1976, 1977. I began to completely lose my faith. I realized that the liturgy was all a travesty. Any meaning it had was gone. The great fathers of the church were really done away with and allocated to the past, and that the church had surrendered all its cherished claims, all its tradition, to the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. So I started writing once again about Vatican II and what was happening to the church, and a series of books. One was published by Doubleday. It's called Everything You Want to Know About the Church, but We're Afraid to Ask for Fear of Excommunication. That appeared in 1989. Once again, it was a selection of the Conservative Book Club. It was published by Doubleday, and it became an international bestseller. Well, after that, I started my own newspaper in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which was called The Metro. And my background, once again, as I told you, was medieval philosophy. The subject of my dissertation was Peter Abelard. He has never been translated into English, so I had to go back to all the original Latin text and translate his writings into English, and then that brought me to the Vatican Library, by the way, in the 70s, where I gained access to a lot of the ancient manuscripts. But probing into Abelard and translating really teaches you how to investigate. And really, it gives you the mind, not of an intellectual, but really of a chicken, because you're able to see, peck the corn, pick the kernels of truth from the manure. So I gained that ability, and I started a newspaper, and I started writing about organized crime in northeastern Pennsylvania. There are several sections of the United States where organized crime is centered. New York, not naturally, Miami, naturally, Las Vegas, naturally, Los Angeles, Kansas City, Missouri, and strange to say, Scranton, Pennsylvania, because the garment industry was here, and the coal industry was here, and the garbage industry was here, all of which gravitated mafioso to northeastern Pennsylvania. The most powerful mafia figure at that time was Russell Buffalino. He became the subject of a movie called The Irishman. I think you know that, directed by Martin Scorsese, with De Niro and Pacino, and it's all the story of Buffalino and Frank Sheeran, who was a labor leader there. I know all these guys, and I dealt with them, and I started to write about them and expose what was really going on, particularly with the garbage trade. Every garbage hauler, almost every garbage hauler on the East Coast was tied to the five families of New York and to Buffalino. And they all used to come here to this area, and John Gotti. I mean, I met, once again, they all became very, very, very familiar figures with me because I was an investigative reporter. I wasn't getting my information from the computer. I wasn't getting my information from other newspapers. I had to go out there and meet them and see what they were doing. Spend a lot of time just sitting, waiting for people to arrive at the Keystone landfill in Dunmore, Pennsylvania. But that's what I was doing, and I kept writing about organized crime and the menace it posed to Northeast PA. The newspaper's called the Metro. It won several prizes. It was a great newspaper. It was unafraid. It was really tackled subjects dead on, and it became a real voice in this area. I mean, we had tens of thousands of subscribers. It was very successful. Well, lo and behold, what happened was, it was successful in terms of subscribers. But once I would write an article about somebody like Louis de Naples, who right now is very much alive and kicking and the head of organized crime, or William D'Elia, who was once I started to write about them, my advertising base shrunk enormously. My advertisers used to receive calls. If you advertise in the Metro again, you will never do business with Epic. So it really almost put them out of business. So after they did that, members of organized crime, including a state representative, said, "Oh, guess what, Paul? We love your newspaper." This is not stupid anyway. "We love your newspaper, and we want to support it. We have a landfill that's not related to Louis de Naples, and we really, we love what you're writing about it." Well, and I was running out of money because I had no advertising base, and I had a small fortune invested in the newspaper. So they said, we want to buy it, but we're going to sell it to a doctor. A medical doctor's going to buy it. He's not going to bother you at all. He's only going to have 5%, and for that, we're going to give you X amount of dollars. So I said, yeah, sure. I'll take it. Somebody can buy in. So what happened was, after that occurred, the state representative, Feeney, and his representatives took me to a warehouse in Pittston, Pennsylvania, where I got the SH beat out of me. They grabbed me by the hair, and they were knocking my head on the concrete floor until, blood was pouring out of my ears and my nose, and I lost my hearing entirely, one ear. And I ended up in the Wilkes-Barre General Hospital. But as a result of that, I was approached by the FBI. And they said, "Paul, you know all these figures, and, you dealt with them. Just go back to work with them, and, you can become a leading consultant for the FBI, and we will pay you. And anything that you're losing at the Metro, we'll take care of." So what happened was, I went back there, and I became an employee of the FBI for 10 years. And once again, that was a significant part of my career. When you see mafia figures like William D. Elia, D''Elia, you just look him up on Wikipedia, you'll see that what he was doing was laundering millions of dollars through the Metro. That was a newspaper I owned. I mean, anybody can do that research and discover that. Okay, so I'm going to, the newspaper closes, and I'm still affiliated with the FBI. And strange things are happening up here, Mark. Maybe I'm speaking at too great of length. I don't know. But interrupt me if I am. But strange things were happening up here. The old Italian strong guys, the mafioso, the Italian mafia, was the people who were the soldiers were no longer Italian. They were Albanians. And they were coming in from Albania, and you had the rise of the Albanian mafia, which is now probably the most powerful mafia in the United States. But Albanians, a lot of them were Muslim. And that brought me to present day. Thanks to my background and thanks to my links, I heard about a terrorist by the name of Adnan al-Shukr Juma, who was a mafia, who was, the FBI listed him as the #1 wanted terrorist in the world. I discovered a lot about him, and I discovered from my Albanians and from the other links I had, other people in the news, in the news industry, which was still operating vigorously at that time, that he was in Canada at a university called McMaster University, where he had stolen radiological material from the reactor, and he was involved in the development of radiological devices, small radiological devices that could be set off at any major city in the United States, and of course, create incredible havoc and chaos. So I went to McMaster University. I found professors there in charge of the reactor and professors at the university. And I talked to a hairdresser there who was telling me all about Adnan. And I talked to people at security there who were telling me all about Adnan. And sure enough, once again, this is my private investigation. The news broke that something serious was happening at McMaster University. From my knowledge, I was working with the Toronto Provincial Police at that time, and they brought me up to Canada. This is kind of interesting, Mark, where I became hailed as an incredible hero. There was a plot called the Toronto 19. There was a plot to blow up Parliament in Canada, in Ottawa, and to behead the Prime Minister. I mean, all the newspapers in the world carried this, and I'm the one that broke this. So I go up to Canada, to Toronto, and I'm wined and dined and hailed as a hero, and I go back home. And while I was in the United States, I'm speaking to various news outlets, ABC, every major news outlet really throughout the world. And the airwaves, of course, are carried to Canada. So because of that, I was sued for $22 million by McMaster University for telling the truth. And I discovered then that in Canada and in England, which operates under British law, you have no freedom of speech. You don't have freedom of speech. You don't have freedom of press. They don't exist in Canada. So I ended up being sued in Canada under Canadian law. And this whole thing seemed really ridiculous, right? This can't happen to an American citizen, especially since what he is saying and doing and writing, he's doing in the United States. So I approached several lawyers, international lawyers, and they said, Paul, yeah, that suit can continue in Canada. You don't have rights there, and you're affected. So anyhow, it took the breath away, and then people from McMaster University were calling me up saying, well, all you need to do is say that what you were saying was incorrect and wrong, and issue an apology, and the lawsuit will go away. Well, my publishing firm at that time, and once again, I've never been self-published, always major publishers, were so intimidated by these threats of huge lawsuits from McMaster's that they acquiesced and they said, "Oh, we don't know what Paul Williams is doing," la. But I didn't. I had a wonderful wife, and I said to her, I said, "Pat, we're being sued for everything we have. I have to be tried in Canada. I need to get a Canadian lawyer and an American lawyer, and it probably is going to cost everything that we have." And my wife said, "I support you." That was it. And once again, I was sued in Canada. I fought back. The lawyers in Canada, it was hard. It was just a horrible experience. But at the end of the day, the lawsuit went away. But I was left with the bills. And that was a huge debt. So I continued writing. I wrote several books for, I think, every major publishing firm in the United States. I wrote for Bantam, Doubleday, Dell, Penguin, you name it. I wrote for them. And I churned out a lot of books. Some of them became international bestsellers. A lot of people throw that term away. But I mean, these were real, genuine bestsellers that were on the bestseller list in the major newspapers throughout the world. One was Operation Gladio. That brings me to the second part of my story. And I'll stop right here if you have any questions.
No, it's amazing so far. I mean, one thing I did have a question on, going back before you go to the next topic is, you talk about organized crime and, do you believe was there anything ever good that, in the origins of that, especially coming out of Sicily and places like that, where it started out with good intentions and went bad, or do you think that they were just bad from the get-go?
Netherlands origins. What you had is, you don't remember, but see, come from an Irish family, and you come from an Italian family. When the Irish were here, when I was a kid, there were places where you'd say, they'd say, "No Irishmen are allowed," and same thing with Italians. There was a real clique. Churches in there, like the Catholic Church, were divided between, Italian churches where the sermon was delivered in Italian, and you had Irish. You had German churches where the sermon was delivered in German, Polish, but everything was ethnically divided, and a lot of people in the Italian communities, and they lived in communities, real communities, where almost everybody was Italian. They spoke Italian. Yeah, they were subject to really, and people don't talk about this, but they were really subjected to all kinds of depression and suppression. I think what happened, and they were exploited by local crime figures, especially here between the Irish and the Italians. The most powerful crime family in this culminating area, going back to before the World War I, 1916, 1917, not the Civil War, no, before World War I. The leading crime family was the Kehoe family. I mean, you couldn't, if you were an Italian immigrant to this area, unless you paid out and were subservient to the Kehoe family, you weren't going anywhere. So what happened is these groups that came up from Sicily and southern Italy began to, they began to form families that would protect them. And ergo, you have the rise of at least the American mafia, Italian mafia in the United States. I knew many of them, and many of them were charming people. Many of them were really, really, really great people, I could say. But a lot of them, of course, were horrible and involved. I think the real division came up with drugs. Before then, they would be involved in prohibition, maybe some prostitution. Gambling was a big thing, sports gambling. betting numbers, betting on horse races. They all control that. But to answer your question, yeah, it started with a good purpose.
Yeah, because I even remember as a kid watching The Godfather, and that there was like, even for in the movie, which was based on some reality, was where the Godfather didn't want to get into the drug business. He said it was a bad business, it was a dirty business, and something we didn't want to do. I always thought that was interesting.
That's a good question, Mark. Let me just stop there 1 second, because regarding the heroin, what happened is, let's cut to 1947. This seems unrelated, but it's very much related to everything around us and everything that's really affecting us today. In 1947, in Italy, there was an election. Italy, there were more communists in Italy than any place else in the world except Russia. In Italy, the PCI, the Italian Communist Party, was gaining control of everything, every village, every town, every city. The United States, it was very much alarmed by this development, because if Italy became a communist country, and you remember, we had the domino effect there after World War II. But if Italy became a communist country, they could establish military bases there, missile bases there, and we were terrified. So in 1945, the U.S. government became, under the old OSS, Office of Strategic Services, became involved in the election in Italy in 1945 to advance the cause of the Christian Democratic Party so the communists couldn't take it over. All right. So along with that operation that was going on in Italy, you had stay-behind units throughout Europe called Gladio units. There were really a secret army in every major non-communist country, in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, Britain, Spain, Portugal, in Italy, of course. Every major, after World War II, set up these secret army, and that was all called Operation Gladio. And what happened with Gladio is you had the situation in Italy. You had this situation, this threat of communism throughout Europe, and the need of funding, okay, to offset or thwart or defeat the forces of communism in these various countries. So suddenly by 1947, with the situation in Italy, you had operations initiated by the the USA, that required the output of billions of dollars. I'm talking standing armies in European countries. It's called Gladio. This is not myth. This is all anybody. There were international juries. There were this is an established fact. So what happened was, in Italy, when we had the threat of the communist takeover, the U.S. government, the Rockefeller Foundations, and the various foundations who funded the original OSS, formed the CIA. And the CIA was formed, once again, primarily because of what was taking place in Italy. And at that time, we began working with people like Lucky Luciano, who got, by the way, he received the Medal of Honor for working with us. Don Callow, who arranged the U.S. invasion, at Indio. All these people were mafia figures, but they began to work very closely with the newly created CIA to prevent the takeover of the Italian government. All right. So the CIA needed money. Where was the money to come from? You could talk to American taxpayers and say, oh, we have standing armies, up in Hungary, and we have standing armies in Germany, and we want to tax you to support them. Well, they need the money immediately. They needed the money in Italy immediately for black ops to go to these communist strongholds and to take the people out. I mean, to take care of the communist leaders, kill them, do away with them, burn their headquarters down. And there's an urgency for funds. So Luciano, along with Paul E. Hellwell and other people in the CIA, said, oh, well, we have a good idea how to raise funds for the CIA. Because doing after World War II, they were also working with the National Chinese, Chiang Kai-shek, to prevent Mao from taking. We know where money can come from. It can come from the poppy fields of Southeast Asia. And we can bring heroin in through Marseille, and into Italy, and then from Italy into the United States, where we can start selling heroin. This sounds incredible, but the fathers of the CIA, Allen Dulles, and the other people who were the original founders of the CIA, all agreed to this plan. Nelson Rockefeller, they all agreed to this plan. And if you get the records from getting of this from the CIA, the CIA and Paul E. Hellwell, Hellwell, pivotal figure in world history. Nobody knows about it. But they said, we're going to bring heroin to the United States through Santos Traficante in Cuba. We'll bring the heroin of Southeast Asia to the laboratories in Marseille, where it can be refined, into Italy, and we'll transport that to Cuba, and we will have the heroin inside oranges and grapefruits and different types of fruit. And so the question was raised, well, what we're doing is talking about addicting the American people to heroin. And the CIA, once again, Dulles and Donovan, Big Bill Donovan, and the other founders of the CIA, James Angleton, said, oh, no, that won't be a problem in the United States bringing heroin in there, because the heroin, we're going to sell the heroin through the mafia at jazz clubs throughout New York, where every place jazz is becoming the rage. And we'll sell it at these various jazz clubs, and the only people who will become afflicted with heroin and addicted would be black people. And for the majority of white America, it won't affect them at all. So, sounds like but that's what happened. So heroin first came in from 1947 for the CIA, which I'm going to raise a question. The heroin is now coming from, and this is off the subject, but it's much more important than my testimony. Heroin is now coming in not from Afghanistan, but it's coming in from Mexico. I don't know if you know that. That's the number one supplier of heroin in the United States right now. Mexico. It's flooding in here. And once again, if you look at the CIA, go and see their budget. Look at their budget. There's no allocation of funds for covert operations. Where's the money coming from? Never changed. It's never changed. So that goes back to what you said about The Godfather. I'm sorry, it's a long story, but yeah, that was the real. I think that was a real crucial moment in U.S. history. But as you would notice, even in The Godfather, that was taking place really in the early 50s and right after World War II. So that was accurate.
Yeah, even a lot of what you said is what they said in the movie, So obviously they had some good research whenever they put that that film together, huh?
Well, a lot of people that were in the movie were mafia figures.
Yeah.
Al Lettieri was a mafia figure. Big. Didn't think Gabrazzi was a mafia muscleman.
Yeah. That's good.
So, do you want me to take you to the second part of this?
Yeah, before you do, one more question is that Scranton is obviously you said tied to a lot of that, mafia roots, and then there's some good political figures that have come out of there too. I'm sure there's some some old time connections there, right?
Hey, it was a good place to be a newsman.
Yeah,
I can tell you.
I could imagine. So yeah, let's go on to the next part of your story.
Okay, well, the next part of my story begins after the lawsuit in Canada, and this is going back maybe a dozen years ago. Once again, I sued my publishing company. So around that time, I had a friend by Patty May, who was part of, well, she was a very close friend of Rodney Howard Brown. So I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm on a speaking engagement, and Patty said, "Oh, there's this preacher who read Operation Gladio, and he really wants to meet you, and he's a Pentecostal." I said, "I don't want to meet any Pentecostal. Forget about that. No, I'm not even vaguely interested." So she took me. I went out to dinner with him. She was driving, and lo and behold, she drove me to the Daughters of the American Revolution convention hall, and Rodney was speaking there. And Rodney was talking about South Africa, and he was talking about organized crime. He was talking about the people who really control geopolitics and control the economy. And I'm listening, I'm thinking, wow, how does this guy know all these things? Because if I talk to 10,000 people, maybe two know about this. But he knew all about it. I think it was largely because he came from South Africa with Cecil John Rose, the creation of the Society of the Elect. But and he kept talking, and I felt something in my spirit. I I mean, I'm at that time practically an agnostic. So he says anybody that you know, uh, wants to come to the altar. I forget his exact language, but for some reason, something, maybe there was, I don't know, something in my rear end propelled me to go before that altar, and I was listening to Rodney, and I got touched. And then I met him, and we had dinner in D.C., and I was talking to him. I said, we should really write a book together. And he agreed. From then on, I think I'm going back to 2015 till now, I became one of the greatest friends of my life is Rodney. However, I was down there. I still figured what was happening at Rodney. You get real. I'm a Catholic. I was really groomed as an intellectual, and I didn't know me to tell it myself, but my background was in there: philosophy, academia, Latin. In any case, I was starting to go. He invited me down to several of his conferences, and at one of the conferences, at the first conference, I see him walking around touching people and people falling to the ground. I figure, oh gosh, this is really nuts. This is so far from me. Please get me out of here. And I was sitting next to Patty May, my wife, and I said, Patty, this is crazy. But I couldn't get out because the place was so packed. So I'm sitting there, and I go to the second meeting and the third, and suddenly Rodney walks up behind me and drags me to the front of the altar and touched me, and I collapsed. I really didn't know what hit me, but it was real. It was real. It wasn't like it was not something that was intellectual, and it was not something that was emotional. It was something that really hit you in the pit of your stomach. I know that happened to you, but I mean, yeah, it's not like being slain in the spirit because you're not slain. I mean, that's a bad phrase. But whatever happens, I ended up on the ground. I told my wife, and my wife was touched. And then after that, I went to another one of the sessions, probably a year later, And in front of me, Rodney touched this guy, who's an African American, and the guy was flop, flopping around the floor like a fish, and flopping right in front of me. And Rodney said, "Oh yeah, he's on fire." And he said, "Well, let him go, let him." And he's flopping around in front of me. He said, "Because God likes him this way. God, he wants to say, well done." So I'm looking at that, and I thought, for some reason, I start breaking out laughing. Mark, I laughed for 45 minutes. I'm dead serious. I had to put the coat over my head, and he had a camera on. Okay, bringing up, that's what happened. So that's when I first got touched. And I realized that, all these other trappings were insignificant. And it was deep. But let's go back to COVID. I wrote a book with Rodney called The Phantom Virus. And at the same time, this is 2021. My wife she had AFib, and she was taken to the hospital. And they said, "Oh, she has traces of COVID." I went to, so they placed her on the ventilator. Despite my wishes and despite my wife's protests, and despite my daughter, they placed her on the ventilator, and I found out she had 4% chance of survival. Well, sure enough, she died. Okay? So my wife died. They had her in COVID. Shortly after that, I was diagnosed with cancer of the bladder. So I had to go through these procedures. And I was in the hospital for I got bacterial pneumonia there in the hospital and almost died. And I didn't know who to call because my religion was listed as still as Roman Catholic. So they brought in a priest to administer last rites. So I was on my way out, and then at the same time I get out, and my life, I have to walk around. It's everything about my life, and my personal freedom had changed. Right in the middle of this whole thing, my sister's house burns down. She's the closest relative I have up here, and she has several strokes, so she's completely immobile and relying completely on me. So I began to lose my faith completely. I said, "Lord, here I am. I give my life to you. First of all, I prayed and prayed and prayed, and my wife still died. You left me alone. Then I got this awful illness. Then when I was praying to you in the illness, I got bacterial pneumonia. And then when I got out, I was saying, thank you, thank you." Then my sister's house burned down. She had this series of strokes, and I had ongoing medical problems. Now, this is just until last week, Mark, and that's why I'm happy to be here. I was thinking, oh man, all is lost. I even dallied around with going back to the Catholic Church and went to certain services, but it was so vacuous, so empty, so dead, and so meaningless that I figured, oh, man. And I'm so far removed from Tampa, of course. So finally, with the start of this conference this week, I go back and I see Rodney in Bango, everything ignited within me again. Everything, it's amazing. Everything. So what I would like to say, yeah, a spiritual journey can be torturous, and it will be. And you can lose your faith. You can. We're not Baptist. Baptists say eternal security. We're not Baptist. You can do that. You can go really far astray, but you can always come home. And that's the beauty. And right now, when I came back from Tampa and I recently came back, I feel totally different.
Wow. Man, what a testimony just on that. Obviously the whole theme of the conference was the storm, and the storm had obviously come and the enemy, in John 10:10, it says the thief comes to steal, kill, and to destroy, but he come that you have life and life more abundantly. And so you're literally walking through that storm. And, I had the opportunity to teach with the kids on Thursday. And the Lord just showed me, he said that, during a storm, because I used to fly airplanes and when you hit turbulence, it was because there was a lot of updrafts, and sometimes your storm can, if you get in the wrong position, can really pull you down. But if you position yourself right, it can actually take you to a new place that you've never gone before. And so I was really, really happy to see you back. We were missing you, and wondering where have you been. And literally, it's like, man, I know I think I tried to reach out to you a few times, and just couldn't get a hold of you. So I'm just so happy to see you back.
I was lost. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can be saved. Even an old coot like me.
Yeah.
I still have something in store for you.
He sure does. He sure does. So one thing I want to talk to you about is this. If first of all, just it's such a blessing to have you on the show. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I know we could go on and on and on because you have such a deep history of your background and what you've done, and you're a huge value. I know you do. Pastor Rodney always says you do some work with like Harvard and things like that. Are you still working with those organizations?
What I did was, you see, once there's a society of scholars called Speculum that I was a part of, and so yeah, but through that, and that's all like the Ivy League schools and major schools throughout the country, where you can go and you can speak about things you would be greatly interested in, like the 12th century Renaissance. So yeah, I've done that, but I've spoken in recent years. I've spoken just about still teach it. I'm called into places like NYU, and so I'm still active that way. But once again, I got slammed by what happened to me in
Yeah. Ben.
like,
No, I was just going to say that, another thing too is you wrote the Phantom Virus, which I mean, obviously exposed a lot of the corruption that was happening with the COVID, and obviously the way that the system's been manipulated and things like that. But then you also experienced a lot of the stuff, firsthand. I mean, you know,
when we wrote the Phantom, everybody was saying Fauci, and everybody was saying that the COVID came from a fish market in Wuhan. We were you got to realize when that book was published, we were the first ones to read about the Wuhan virologies. We're the first ones to expose Fauci for what he is. We're the first ones that said that the virus was manufactured. It's in that book that was written once again, even long before Bobby Kennedy was talking about it. We expose all of that. Now, how do you get that kind of knowledge and are led to that kind of research? It's only by the hand of God, because I'm telling you, you can read that book right now. It's as fresh as a daisy. And it's incredible. There's nothing there that changed. And that was written right at the start. That was even written before right when Pastor Riley was locked up. That's going at the very, very start of the lockdown.
Yeah, it was very eye-opening for sure. I think the only thing is a lot of people choose not to read. They just like to sit and be fed information, but they don't want to dig for themselves. It's like, hey, whatever the news says, I'm going to do. And if they tell me to wear a mask and take a shot and do whatever, I'll just do it.
And of course, you have feeds into that. And you have the fact that right now, the American people, only 5% of the American people read a book a year. That's why you have the collapse of all the bookstores. It's not like they're buying books online. They're not buying books. They're not reading. You go to school and they're not learning. If you talk to people anywhere, if you talk to people about what's taking place in the Ukraine, they really have no idea at all. They have no idea of geopolitics at all. They're not informed about things that really impact them day to day, hour to hour at all. So that's why, podcasts like this are important. And I feel right now a sense of obligation to at least proclaim the words as I know it.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing too is I listened to a lot of old time teachers and things like that, that especially in the Bible realm, who study prophecy and what's happening in Europe and the European Union. And one thing, I was listening to a guy the other day who's passed away now. He's been gone for at least 6 or 7 years. But I mean, he was, this was years ago. He said as the European Union was being developed and how their GDP is so much bigger than the United States and their power could be so much greater and all these things. And it leads into this one world bank and, and all these things that are going on. But one thing he said that really hit me was he said that in Europe, the average European knows a lot about what's happening in the U.S. politics and the politics of the world. But if you go to the U.S., most people don't have a clue what's happening anywhere, even in their own government.
That's why just go to this is my advice. Don't just go to the books of prophecy. Read people like Brezhnev, who was the national security advisor. He wrote a book called The Grand Chessboard. And this is what Rodney does. Rodney reads these things and he knows them. Dating back to in the 1980s, wrote that book, The Grand Chessboard, and he said, prize for the U.S. and the prize is to control the world's wealth. That's what we want to do. He wanted to do it, and he said the only way to do that is with the creation of Eurasia, because that's all one continent anyhow, from China all the way over to France. That's all one continent. That remains. You look at what's happening in the Middle East. You look what's happening in the Ukraine. You look what's happening in places like Azerbaijan. It's all part. It falls into that same pattern for the control of the world's wealth. Much of the world's wealth, for instance, is located in the Caspian Sea. People aren't aware of that. Vast, vast, vast resources. And whoever ultimately gains control of that, like Brzezinski said, will control everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why you need to get the word out as much as you can. I think a lot of times, especially with going through the storm that you went through, people think, well, I'm done. There's no more value left. And I know Pastor Rodney always says that you're in your most productive time now. And because you know what, as your generation leaves the scene, we're in a generation coming up that relies on AI and just spoon-fed information that doesn't really dig for information. So it's so important to have your knowledge to be spread with people.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah. So one thing I'd like to do as part of the podcast and wrapping up really is, what advice do you give to that young person who's just getting started out? Like, you're an author, you've written many books. I wrote a book. I never did anything with it. It's still sitting in my computer. And so there's certain things that you have knowledge and information to help a young person is like, hey, listen, if I started out today, if you were starting out right now all over again, and you had it to do over, what would you go back and tell your younger self to say, look, do this, don't do that, but these are things to help you avoid some pitfalls in life,
Mark, I got to tell you this. For some reason, I think everything that I sound please don't think I'm sounding like Kamala Harris, but like Joe Biden. But there's very little that I personally would have done differently. I was at the right place, fortunately, at the right time for some major opportunities that would not be offered to members of the current generation. For instance, when I was a young writer, there were magazines. Magazines were huge places where you could get, for writers. They could be published in a magazine, and that would lead on to other things. I was involved in the movies. I was involved in, writing for magazines, writing for newspapers, and actually the leading newspapers throughout the world. That's all gone. So I couldn't advise somebody to go into a career in journalism because that would not be good advice because that's gone. And I would not encourage anybody to try to write a book because once again, that's gone. When I was writing books, there were major publishers that would all turn out 5, 10, 15,000 new titles a year. So the firms that I wrote for, Random House, a Doubleday, Phantom, Penguin, they're not all different companies. Now they're all one company. They've consolidated. And instead of publishing every company publishing thousands of books a year, you have this conglomerate publishing 5,000 titles a year. And the only titles that they will publish are from established writers. And so therefore, if you're not established and you don't have you have no, so what advice, I can't give any firm advice what I would advise young people is to do what you're doing right now. Start a podcast and unite with other people who believe the same way that we believe, and to form a coalition where we can exert some real power. For instance, with Rodney, I think Rodney's pivotal to this whole thing because he's incredibly knowledgeable. He has a vast platform, and he's charismatic. And he's out of all the people I know, he really, really, really has the heart of the Lord. That's I would encourage you. Well, when I see people like you, I have hope. I come from a different age. I feel like I've been transported here from, antiquity.
Everything you have to say is very relevant, even to what we're facing. What are your thoughts on like what's going on with this election and things that are coming in the future here?
Well, I fear for the country. I fear that I know, and the elections are rigged. It goes back a long way. I mean, if people don't believe that, then they're still believing in Santa Claus. I mean, the elections are rigged. The system is corrupt. From every part of the system is corrupt. The news is corrupt. The newspapers I work for are all corrupt. They're all controlled. Just remember I told the story of the Metro, how you control the advertisers.
Yeah.
Well, you have a cabal who will exert control so they can control what you see and what you hear. For instance, Fox News and CNN, I don't know if you're, and MSNBC and ABC, NBC, CBS are all, look at their corporate shareholders. They're all owned by the same people. So, like you say about this election, naturally, any Christian that does not vote for Trump needs a swift kick to the ground. What I see there is like people who are Christian who are afraid to put up a Trump sign for fear that their neighbors might be offended. Only 18% of the Christians vote. What? I mean, please. So I don't know what is going to happen if Trump wins the election, and I'm not a prophet, but what I do see as an historian, and I am an historian, is that something cataclysmic will definitely take place. It could be another epidemic. There could be a nuclear incident. Something is going to set place to completely discredit him. If Kamala wins, it'd be something that occurred that would entrench her. So we're still being manipulated, my friend, and the manipulator is our enemy. And
Yeah, 100%. I was actually preaching in Miami area not too long ago, and I said, we're all excited about the election, and you want Trump to win. Thank God if he does. But I said, don't think it's going to be an easy ride if he does, because they'll do whatever it takes to discredit the guy. They'll fabricate things out of nowhere to destroy the economy and upset the stock market and put us into poverty and everything. So don't think that just because he gets elected, it's going to be like glory days again. Yeah.
Yeah. That ringing for people who, I'm sorry. My phone is off, but they're still ringing.
No, that's okay. Go ahead. You're an important man.
Some, so, I was blessed to gain some knowledge and blessed to share it. That's all I have.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I'd like to do a follow-up with you, maybe after the election, we could get back on and, talk about some things. And, it'd be great to do a recap with you. I mean, because your stories, we just barely scratched the surface of what you've done and where you've been and all that kind of stuff. So is there anything in closing you'd like to share with the listener?
Give a big.
I will, for sure. Definitely, 100%. So, all right. Well, that's it for today then. What an amazing testimony and story from Dr. Paul Williams. His life has been changed, because of his connection with our church and Pastor Rodney Howard-Browne. And, it's just amazing. You think that you've made it and, you're out there in life and you're doing some major things, and then the storms come out of nowhere. And, we were teaching about storms in our Bible school here when I was teaching the kids' church at our latest conference. And, a storm can either take you out or it can take you up, and you have to make a decision. Maybe you're going through a storm in your life, and you look at the wind, you look at the waves. We have the ability as a Christian to speak to that storm and call peace to the storm. But we also can find the convection currents that are rising high, just like that eagle behind me. We can spread the wings and we can fly high during a storm. And so, you want to position yourself to be able to ride out these storms and go to a whole new level in your life. Sometimes people see a storm coming and they get scared and say, oh my gosh, just like the disciples did. They were crying out to Jesus, save me, save me, save me. And Jesus was sleeping in the boat because he knew the storm was going to take them to a whole new level, and they just needed to find that peace in the storm and rise above it. And so look, if you want peace in the storm that you're dealing with right now, you can just say a prayer with me. The Bible says that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, that the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ. And whoever calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. And look, you're a whosoever, you're out there, you're somebody, but maybe you haven't called on the name of the Lord yet. Maybe you've heard about it. Maybe you thought it wasn't for you. But I'm telling you right now that we're coming near the end of time. We're near the end of the age. There's only a few grains of sand left in this hourglass of our age, the church age, and then we transition into the next age. And so, look, if you want the free gift that God has for you today, and it really is a free gift. I mean, it's no different than if I was to bless you with a new car or a new house. I have to have the keys held out to you, and you have to receive those keys. And so there's some people who say, no, they don't want to receive the keys to that car because they feel like there's something, a hook, or it's a scam or whatever. But no, listen, if you can blindly just say, listen, I receive everything that God has for me today. I receive it and I'll take it. And I want my life to change. You can do that simply by saying a prayer with me. So you say, dear Lord Jesus, come into my heart. Forgive me of all my sins. Wash me and cleanse me. Set me free. Thank you, Jesus, that you died for me. I believe that you've risen from the dead and you're coming back for me. Fill me with the Holy Spirit. Give me a passion for the lost, a hunger for the things of God, and a holy boldness to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm saved. I'm forgiven. I'm born again. And I'm on my way to heaven because I have Jesus in my heart. And listen, there's another step to that. You can also go get to your local church. If you don't have a local church, look out for a good church, a good Bible-believing Book of Acts type of church, and get yourself baptized in water. I think that's the next step that every new believer needs to do. Get yourself plugged into a church. Don't just say, I'm going to only go online, search, because there are great churches in your area. You just need to plug into them. You can always follow our ministry. We're Alfano Ministries. If you like what we have, you can always become a partner of Alfano Ministries. You can just go to thealfanos.com or PRO, V as in victory, B as in boy, 3. So it's PRO, V as in victory, B as in boy, prov, 3, global.com. And on there, you could become a partner of us. And, hey, I love the content you got. Or maybe you know somebody that should be on our program. So, hey, we love a recommendation. We'd like to get them on. And, and we're believing for better equipment. We want to have our own studio where we can actually bring guests into so the quality's good. It doesn't look like we're in witness protection and the sound's okay and this and that. So we want to take this whole entire podcast to a brand new level. One other announcement is we are now officially on Jesus Pod. So if you go to the App Store, you can download the app Jesus Pod. And in Jesus Pod, all you have to do is you go to Lifestyles, I believe it is. So when you're on there, so let me bring up my app here. It's Jesus Pod. That's Jesus, or if you're Spanish, it's Jesus Pod. And then you go under podcasts. So you can see under here, there's a podcast button. You click the button. And under that, there is your life. It says, let me move it over this way here, life button. And then if you scroll down, you see all these amazing podcasts they have on here. And these are all Bible-based, really good doctrine. And then there we are, the 7K Revelation podcast right there on the Jesus Pod. So, download the app today. It'd be a great place for you to pick up the content. And, hey, until we meet again, this episode was actually late. We dealt with the effects of Hurricane Milton. Then we went straight into our conference at our church. So we're doing working with hurricane relief and different things like that. So, it's obviously I'd like to get the podcast out every Friday. This one is now coming out to you on a Monday or Tuesday by the time I get it all processed and put up. But, forgive us for that. But if you have more content, we can get ahead of the game. And we have some really good people lined up coming. But Dr. Paul Williams, I saw him and I said, man, we got to get him on here no matter what. So I love his story of what he's been through, his history coming through the Catholic Church and his career with organized crime and the FBI and all these things. It's just amazing to me. So thanks again, Dr. Paul Williams, for coming on. That's Marc Alfano, and I'm going to go ahead and just put up my outro to the video, and we'll see you again next week. This broadcast has been brought to you by friends and partners of Alfano Ministries International. Thank you for partnering with us today.